Girl vanished in 1990, 22 years later. Dad flips through the old yearbook and notice. Frank Sanders had lived the past 22 years with one unchanging morning ritual. It was the same sea mist that blanketed Mornington, Oregon every morning, a small town tucked between forested cliffs and the roaring coast. To most, the fog brought a sense of peace. To Frank, it was a shroud that had never lifted. They say you can get used to anything, but not to the absence of a child. It was spring 1990 when Alicia Sanders vanished. She was 18, recently graduated, popular at school, bright but not arrogant. She had a sharp mind for science, a soft heart for marine life, and a stubborn sense of loyalty. Alicia was set to attend the University of Oregon that fall, with dreams of becoming a marine biologist. She loved the ocean, adored her pet goldfish as a child, and could identify most coastal birds by their call before she turned 10. The day she disappeared started like any other. She had breakfast with her parents, teased her mom for overcooking the eggs, and left a post-it note on the fridge. Gone for a walk, be back before lunch, love you. She never came back. It was as if the fog had taken her. No body, no witness, no signs of struggle, no known enemies. Her boyfriend at the time, Brandon Knox, had a solid alibi. Her best friend Amy Davidson helped search for weeks. Flyers were stapled to every pine tree and telephone pole from the lighthouse to the town square. But Alicia was simply gone. The only item missing from her room was her favorite edition of The Secret Garden. The Mornington Police Department filed the case as presumed runaway, possibly abducted. Her parents never bought it. Not for a second. Alicia had plans. She had dreams. And more than that, she had loyalty. She wouldn't have just walked away. Now, 22 years later, Frank stood in that same bedroom. Posters still clung to the walls, sun-faded now. Her desk sat untouched textbooks and notebooks exactly where she left them. Even her closet still held the prom dress she wore just weeks before she vanished. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. "It's time," he whispered to no one. Last night he and Elaine had made the hardest decision of their lives. They would finally pack Alicia's things, not to forget, but to preserve, to make space for healing. That morning, as he opened the window, the cold air stirred up 22 years of settled dust. Frank began with the closet, handling each piece of clothing like a relic. Her favorite blue sweater, the patched-up jeans, the worn-out Converse each held a memory. By midday, he had sorted clothes into boxes donation storage keepsake. Then he found something he didn't recognize, a yearbook. He sat down on her bed, the book heavy in his lap. Somehow in all these years, neither he nor Elaine had opened it. Perhaps the pain had been too raw. He flipped through the pages, slowly stopping at her senior portrait. She looked so alive, so confident. Her eyes sparkled lips caught in a knowing smile. Beside her photo was Amy Davidson's, Amy. They had been inseparable. Weekend sleepovers, matching Halloween costumes, late-night talks by the fireplace. Amy had come by often in the months after Alicia vanished, but eventually drifted away as everyone did. Frank turned to the back of the book, where students had scribbled messages. One line stopped him cold. To Amy, "Don't forget to return The Secret Garden, the illustrated edition, you old grandma. Love you forever." He chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. Alicia always called Amy an old grandma for falling asleep during movies. But that book, that missing book, had never been found. Driven by sudden urgency, Frank carried the yearbook downstairs and started going through the boxes of Alicia's old belongings in the living room. He laid out every book, magazine, and notebook. But the illustrated edition of The Secret Garden was nowhere. He turned to the yearbook again. In the back, Amy had written her phone number with a scribble, "Call me anytime, BFF." Frank dialed it. Disconnected. Just then Elaine walked in with groceries and stopped in shock at the mess of books strewn across the room. "Frank, what on earth are you doing?" "I found this," he said, showing her the yearbook. "She mentions the book. I just thought, maybe it's important." Elaine sighed. Her face, always composed, now showed cracks of fatigue. "It's just a book, Frank." "Do you know where Amy is now?" Elaine hesitated. "I see her sometimes. She lives in a camper now near the state park." "I want to talk to her," Frank said. "Don't push her," Elaine warned. Alicia's disappearance shattered her too. But Frank had already made up his mind. Something about the missing book, that one casual note in the yearbook, had ignited a spark in him. It might be nothing, or it might be everything. Frank drove slowly through the winding coastal road that led to the outskirts of Mornington. The scent of wet pine and sea salt filled the air, the road damp from the morning fog that had only recently begun to lift. He hadn't seen Amy Davidson in over 2 decades. He had no idea what kind of reception to expect, but he knew he had to try. The camper park was a modest cluster of mobile homes, scattered among tall firs and alder trees, with tangled blackberry bushes spilling out along the gravel lanes. Elaine had said Amy parked near the back, under the shadow of a weather-worn pine. Frank pulled up beside a blue and white camper, the paint chipped, but the small flower pots on the windowsills showing signs of care. He climbed out of his car, clutching the yearbook tightly in his hands. He knocked. For a moment, nothing. Then the door creaked open. A woman in her early 40s peered out. Her hair was lighter now, pulled back loosely, and her eyes, though aged, still held the same cautious warmth. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Amy," Frank said, clearing his throat. "I'm Frank Sanders, Alicia's father." Recognition hit her like a tide. Her face paled, and she opened the door wider without another word. Inside the camper was small but homey. Books lined a makeshift shelf above the kitchenette. A crocheted blanket was draped over the back of a bench. The kettle whistled softly. "I never thought, it's been so long," Amy said as she poured 2 cups of coffee. "I found Alicia's yearbook this morning," Frank explained. "She left you a note in it. About a book, The Secret Garden." Amy froze for a second, then nodded. She set her mug down and walked to a cabinet beneath her bed. After rummaging for a moment, she pulled out a familiar hardcover worn at the edges, but intact. She handed it to Frank. "I never returned it," she said softly. "After she vanished, I couldn't bring myself to. It's the last piece of her I have." Frank opened the book gently. Nestled inside was a torn magazine page, used as a bookmark. The image was of a teen boy in a modeling pose, wearing late 80s fashion. "That's Jason Murray," Amy said, noticing Frank's gaze. "He was in our class." "I remember the name," Frank said. "Elaine mentioned you dated him." Amy's expression darkened. "That's not true. I never liked him. Alicia did, briefly. She thought he needed help, someone to believe in him." Frank frowned. "Why didn't we know?" "Because she was unsure, and I think—" "Embarrassed," Amy replied. "He was troubled even back then. She thought she could fix him." Frank flipped back to the yearbook. Jason's photo was there, his smile too perfect, too rehearsed. Something about it felt off. "Do you know where he is now?" Amy nodded slowly. "We had a high school reunion last weekend. It was at his house. I didn't go, but I have the address." She retrieved her phone and showed Frank the contact info from the group chat. Frank took out his own phone. "Do you mind sending that to me?" Amy hesitated, then nodded. "Just be careful." He left the camper with more questions than answers. The book had led him to Amy to Jason, and Jason, the name gnawed at him. Why had Alicia hidden that relationship? And why had Jason reacted so violently when Frank last reached out all those years ago? The clouds thickened overhead as Frank started the engine. The coastal road stretched before him, wet and winding. This wasn't about a book anymore. It was about a secret that refused to stay buried. Frank drove slowly through Mornington's uptown neighborhoods, where cedar-lined streets gave way to manicured lawns and homes with wraparound porches. He followed the address Amy had sent him, a street tucked into one of the wealthier cliffside enclaves. Jason Murray lived here now, a far cry from the average, mildly troubled high school kid Frank barely remembered. The house loomed ahead, a modern two-story with glass-paneled balconies and a circular driveway. Frank parked across the street. He sat there for a long time, unsure of what to say, or even what he was hoping to find. He wasn't a cop, he had no authority, but he had questions, and a father's stubborn instinct. He walked up to the front gate and rang the bell. Moments later, the door opened. A tall man in his early 40s stepped out. Expensive clothes, impeccably groomed, but it was his eyes that held Frank's attention alert, calculating, instantly suspicious. "Jason Murray?" Frank asked. "Yes." "Who are you?" "I'm Frank Sanders, Alicia Sanders' father." Jason's posture stiffened. "What do you want?" "I'm not here to accuse anyone. I found Alicia's yearbook this morning. There are things in there that made me think she might have been close to you." Jason's face darkened. "I barely knew her. We talked a few times, that's it. She mentioned you to her best friend. And she used your photo as a bookmark. Do you know why?" Jason scoffed. "I wouldn't know. People used magazine clippings for all kinds of things." Frank tried a different tone, softer, less confrontational. "She believed in people. Wanted to help them, even when she shouldn't have. Amy said she thought you needed someone." Jason took a half step forward. "That was a long time ago. I don't want any part of this. I have a reputation to protect. If this is about dredging up rumors for a podcast or article, I'm not a reporter. I'm a father," Frank cut in, "and I've lived with questions for 22 years. Jason narrowed his eyes, his body rigid. "I told the police everything back then. I've got nothing else to say." Frank nodded and turned to leave, but as he reached his car, he looked back. Jason was still watching him, not with curiosity, but with wariness, as if Frank had stirred something dangerous. Back in his car, Frank sat with his thoughts. Jason's reaction had been too sharp, too defensive. Was it just guilt by association, or something more? He started the engine and began driving. Aimlessly at first, but then almost unconsciously, he took the coastal road out of town. Something told him not to go home just yet. Not until he had calmed the storm inside him. The road led him toward Whitlow Cliff, a rugged overlook that Alicia had loved. As a girl, she'd come here to sketch seabirds and crashing waves. Frank parked near a turnout and walked to the edge. The ocean below churned with whitecaps. Gulls screeched overhead. It was beautiful and cruel, just like memory. He stood there for a while until a thought struck him. Jason had mentioned a vacation property once back in high school, somewhere near this cliff. Frank remembered him bragging about it during a school fundraiser. A cottage, he'd said, hidden. Frank returned to his car and drove further along the cliff road. Eventually, he spotted a narrow lane leading to a wooden gate partially hidden by overgrowth. A private drive, no signs, but tire tracks marked the mud. He parked further down the road out of sight and walked back on foot. The lane ended in a small clearing where a cottage stood, weathered but sturdy, with a view of the sea and a garden overrun with native plants. It didn't look abandoned. A car was parked outside, Jason's. Frank crouched behind a thicket and watched. A few minutes later, Jason emerged from the cottage carrying a shovel, a wooden box, and a small bouquet of white hyacinths. Frank's breath caught, Alicia's favorite flower. Jason loaded the items into a garden cart and headed down a narrow trail leading away from the house. Frank waited until Jason was out of sight, then followed from a distance. The trail wound through coastal brush and ended in a secluded clearing near the cliff's edge. Jason knelt and began to dig. Frank stayed hidden behind a rock, watching in silence. Jason opened the wooden box and stared at its contents. Papers, photos, something else Frank couldn't make out. He laid the bouquet on top and closed the lid. Then he placed the box in the hole and began to cover it with earth. When he finished, he stood over the fresh mound and whispered, "You can hold these memories now, Alicia." Frank's heart stopped. He stumbled backward, dislodging a stone. Jason's head snapped up. "Hello," he called. Frank frozen. Jason scanned the brush, then slowly returned to the cottage. but he kept glancing over his shoulder. When Jason was gone, Frank crept to the site. The earth was still soft. He began to dig. Beneath the soil, he found the box. Inside, letters, photos, a handmade doll, and a stack of printed messages. The truth wasn't buried with Alicia. It had just been waiting to be uncovered. Frank stared at the box he had just unearthed. The scent of hyacinths clung to the disturbed earth, filling the quiet clearing with a sweet, mournful fragrance. He knelt and lifted the lid. Inside the wooden box held a sad collage of memory and guilt. Faded photos, handwritten letters, printouts of text messages, and a small woolen doll that Alicia had once sewn in middle school. Frank's breath hitched as he picked up a stack of pages and began to read. The notes were unmistakably Alicia's. Her handwriting hadn't changed much from childhood. Letters to someone unnamed, pages of reflections, even poems, some dated just months before her disappearance. But it was the printouts that shook Frank most. Messages between Alicia and someone named Jay, a coded trail of affection and frustration, hope and fear. One message dated a week before her disappearance read, "I'm scared, but I still believe you can change. Please don't prove me wrong." Before Frank could examine the rest, a twig snapped behind him. He turned sharply. Jason Murray stood at the edge of the clearing, a gun in his hand. "I knew someone was watching," Jason said, stepping closer. His eyes were wild, his knuckles white on the pistol grip. "I saw your car parked up the hill." "What do you think you're doing?" Frank's pulse thundered. "You said her name," he replied, voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "I heard you say it over the grave. What is this, Jason?" "You need to go," Jason barked. "You don't know what you're messing with. She was my daughter," Frank's voice cracked. "If you cared about her, tell me the truth now." Jason raised the gun a fraction. "This doesn't concern you anymore. She made her choices. She was 17, Frank shouted. "A kid. And you were older, manipulating her." Jason's expression darkened. "She came to me. She wanted to help me. She thought she understood. But then she turned her back on me." Frank dropped the box and stepped forward, hands out. "You don't have to do this. The truth will come out." Jason's eyes flicked toward the box. "I buried it for a reason." With a sudden movement, Frank lunged forward. The gun fired loud and sharp, but missed striking the dirt a few feet away. Frank tackled Jason, and they fell to the ground in a chaotic scramble. The pistol skittered across the ground and vanished into the underbrush. Frank pinned Jason down with all the strength his 68-year-old frame could muster. Jason thrashed wildly beneath him. "You don't get to hide this anymore," Frank growled. Sirens pierced the air. Both men froze. Moments later, 2 police officers burst into the clearing, weapons drawn. One pulled Frank off Jason, the other restrained Jason as he struggled. "Everyone on the ground, hands where we can see them," Frank obeyed, heart pounding. "I'm the one who called," he rasped. "I'm Frank Sanders. My daughter Alicia disappeared 22 years ago. He just buried something connected to her." Jason spat dirt and fury. "This is insane. He attacked me." The officers separated them, cuffing Jason and radioing for backup. One officer secured the wooden box, photographing it and placing it in an evidence bag. Another took Frank aside and began questioning him. By the time Detective Ramirez arrived, a woman with calm eyes and gray-streaked hair, Jason was seated in a squad car, glaring at everyone. Ramirez approached Frank. "You're Alicia Sanders' father." Frank nodded. "I think this box, those letters, prove he had a relationship with her. That he lied. She looked into the hole, and that he's been holding on to her things all these years." Jason's car parked nearby yielded more. A laptop with photos, a thumb drive filled with video files, receipts, showing purchases of white hyacinths over several years. An obsession documented. The evidence grew damning. By nightfall, Jason had been arrested on multiple charges, including obstruction possession of potentially incriminating material and suspicion of involvement in a cold case. Frank returned home dazed and hollow. Elaine met him at the door, panic giving way to relief. and then anguish as he told her everything. She clutched the side of his shirt, leaning into his chest. "Did we get her back?" "Not yet," Frank said softly, "but we're close." That night Frank couldn't sleep. Images of Alicia, of Jason with the gun, of the box and its broken memories haunted him. He sat by the window, watching the fog roll over Mornington again, just as it had the day she disappeared. The next morning Ramirez called. "We're bringing in cadaver dogs. There's another area near the cliff we want to examine." Frank and Elaine drove together. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the ocean as they arrived at the site. The dogs barked and dug at a different location about 15 feet from where the box had been found. The soil was different, softer. The forensic team moved in. An hour later, one of them stepped away, her face pale. "We found human remains." Elaine collapsed into Frank's arms. They had found Alicia. Forensic crews worked meticulously under the early morning sun, carefully unearthing what they now believed to be Alicia Sanders' final resting place. The soil was moist and loamy, easier to dig than expected. Each shovelful brought the truth closer to the surface. Detective Ramirez stood nearby with Frank and Elaine, speaking in a low, solemn tone. "We'll preserve all remains with care. She deserves dignity, and we'll do everything by the book." Elaine nodded numbly, clutching Frank's arm as if to keep from collapsing. "We waited 22 years for this. Just tell us when it's over." Soon, pieces of Alicia's clothing were unearthed. A fragment of denim, possibly her favorite jeans, peeked from the dirt, followed by what looked like part of a sandal. Moments later, a forensic technician signaled quietly. They had found a partial skeleton. Elaine gasped, burying her face in Frank's chest. Frank held her tightly, whispering, "She's coming home." By midday, the full scope of the burial was evident. The forensic team documented every inch, photographing and scanning the site. A coroner gently lifted each bone and artifact, placing them into marked evidence bags. Despite the horror, there was an undercurrent of reverence. Detective Ramirez returned to them. "We'll confirm identity via dental records and DNA, but the location evidence and timeline make this almost certain." "I'm so sorry." Frank swallowed hard. "Do you think she suffered?" "We won't know until the medical examiner finishes, but the position suggests she wasn't buried hastily. Whoever did this took time. That may mean she died quickly." Later that day, Ramirez escorted Frank and Elaine to the station. There, they reviewed more evidence from the wooden box and Jason's laptop. Photos of Alicia, some candid, others clearly taken without her knowledge, spoke to an obsession spiraling into madness. Jason was refusing to speak. His lawyer had arrived and requested time to review the evidence. But the DA was already building a strong case. Ramirez showed them something, a digital file found on Jason's thumb drive. It was a video time-stamped 3 days before Alicia's disappearance. In it, Alicia sat on a couch in what looked like the vacation cottage. She was talking directly to Jason, pleading with him. "You need to let me go," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't love, Jason. I care about you, but I can't live like this. I can't keep your secrets. My parents deserve to know I'm okay." Elaine broke down completely. Frank turned away, jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. "I'm sorry," Ramirez said, pausing the footage. "We can stop here." "No," Frank said. "Play the rest." Alicia continued, her voice softer now. "I believed you could change. I thought if someone just cared enough, you'd find your way. But now I see you don't want to change. You want control." Jason's voice off camera replied coldly, "You owe me. You don't get to walk away." The screen faded to black. The next day, charges were officially filed. Jason Murray was booked for Alicia's abduction and murder. His bail was denied. Mornington's courthouse buzzed with media, former classmates, and townspeople who had long remembered Alicia's face on missing posters. Frank and Elaine held a press conference. Frank spoke calmly, purposefully. "For 22 years we've lived without answers. We grieved without a body, questioned every memory, clung to hope. Now we finally know the truth. Alicia didn't run away. She was taken by someone she once trusted. We hope her story reminds others, trust your instincts, protect your children, love them even when they try to hide their pain. The town rallied behind the Sanders family. Alicia's high school principal sent flowers. Former teachers emailed condolences. Even Brandon Knox, Alicia's boyfriend at the time, reached out. He was living in Portland, now married with children. He wrote, "I never forgot her. I wish I'd known what she was going through. Maybe I could have protected her. I'm so sorry." Amy Davidson returned to Mornington from her job out of state. When she saw Frank and Elaine again, she hugged them for a long time, both crying. "I should have known," she whispered. She dropped hints. "But I thought it was just teenage confusion. I didn't press her. I should have pressed." Elaine gently said, "You were a child too." He isolated her. That's what abusers do. Together they began planning Alicia's memorial. A week after Jason Murray's arrest, the town of Mornington gathered on the coast for Alicia Sanders' memorial. The decision had been made with care. Frank and Elaine wanted to honor their daughter, not with a grave, but with freedom. Alicia had always loved the sea. She had dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, and the ocean had been her haven. It would now become her resting place. Alicia's ashes were placed in a small sea-green urn. Frank cradled it as he boarded the lead boat with Elaine beside him. Amy Davidson joined them along with Detective Ramirez and retired Detective Ron Keller, who had never stopped caring about the case. Following in a flotilla were boats filled with Alicia's former classmates, teachers, neighbors, and townspeople. The news of her discovery had reopened old wounds in the community, but also brought long overdue closure. The boats drifted a mile off the coast of Whitlow Cliff, near the bluff where Alicia had last been seen, and ultimately found. The sea shimmered under a blue sky, unusually calm for the Oregon coast. Frank took this as a sign. The memorial began with silence. Only the lapping of waves and the occasional cry of gulls could be heard. Then the minister spoke. For 22 years, Alicia's loved ones carried the weight of her absence, the ache of not knowing. Today, we lay that burden to rest. We remember Alicia not for how her life ended, but for how brightly it shone. Elaine stepped forward. Next, her voice breaking as she spoke, Alicia loved stories. She loved the sea. She wanted to heal the ocean and its creatures. Today, we give her to the waters she adored. Frank opened the urn. Together they released Alicia's ashes into the breeze. The powder swirled, caught in the light, then drifted down to the surface of the sea. From every boat, white hyacinths were tossed into the waves, Alicia's favorite flower. The ocean became a floating garden of remembrance. Amy stepped forward, last tears streaming down her cheeks. She held a copy of The Secret Garden, the book she had never returned. "She wanted me to give this back," Amy whispered. "I wish I had Alicia. I'm sorry." She kissed the worn cover, then gently set it on the water. It floated for a moment before sinking slowly, as if reluctant to leave. Later that evening, Frank and Elaine sat on their porch, a photo of Alicia between them. Not the senior portrait, but one taken at the beach, Alicia laughing, wind in her hair, joy on her face. She was so young, Frank said, voice thick. She still believed love could fix anything. Elaine nodded. That was her gift and her curse. But I'd rather she had loved too much than not at all. Detective Ramirez visited one final time that week. Jason has confessed, she said. He admitted to keeping Alicia at the cottage. When she refused to lie for him or rekindle their relationship, he panicked. He hit her. When he realized she was gone, he buried her, then ran. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, Frank asked. Yes. The evidence, the confession, the photos. It's enough. The DA is confident. There will be no trial. He's pleading guilty. Amy visited often after that. She helped plan a scholarship in Alicia's name at the University of Oregon, supporting future marine biology students. She would have wanted that, Amy said. Frank returned to photography. He took pictures of the coastline Alicia loved, donating them to local schools. Elaine began volunteering at a shelter for teens. They grieved, but they didn't stop living. One day, Frank visited Alicia's room, untouched for over 2 decades. He placed a single white hyacinth in a vase by her window. Outside, the Pacific glistened. Waves rolled in constant cleansing. The house was quiet. But it no longer felt hollow. Alicia was home. When he realized she was gone, he buried her, then ran. "He'll spend the rest of his life in prison," Frank asked. "Yes. The evidence, the confession, the photos, it's enough. The DA is confident. There will be no trial. He's pleading guilty." Amy visited often after that. She helped plan a scholarship in Alicia's name at the University of Oregon, supporting future marine biology students. She would have wanted that, Amy said. Frank returned to photography. He took pictures of the coastline Alicia loved, donating them to local schools. Elaine began volunteering at a shelter for teens. They grieved, but they didn't stop living. One day, Frank visited Alicia's room, untouched for over 2 decades. He placed a single white hyacinth in a vase by her window. Outside, the Pacific glistened. Waves rolled in constant cleansing. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. Alicia was home. When he realized she was gone, he buried her, then ran. "He'll spend the rest of his life in prison," Frank asked. "Yes. The evidence, the confession, the photos, it's enough. The DA is confident. There will be no trial. He's pleading guilty." Amy visited often after that. She helped plan a scholarship in Alicia's name at the University of Oregon, supporting future marine biology students. She would have wanted that, Amy said. Frank returned to photography. He took pictures of the coastline Alicia loved, donating them to local schools. Elaine began volunteering at a shelter for teens. They grieved, but they didn't stop living. One day, Frank visited Alicia's room, untouched for over 2 decades. He placed a single white hyacinth in a vase by her window. Outside, the Pacific glistened. Waves rolled in constant cleansing. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. Alicia was home.